The Crimson Ledger. Chapter 1. Orchid Lux. Room 712. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It smeared Falcon Ridge's neon skyline into a blur of reds and blues, like a cheap watercolor left out in a storm. Julian Voss stood at the corner of 9th and Crescent, his trench coat soaked through, the weight of it clinging to his shoulders like an old regret. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating the sharp angles of his face. Gaunt, unshaven, eyes like chipped obsidian. The city's pulse thrummed around him. Honking cabs, distant sirens, the low hum of a world that never slept but always lied. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent, like a fly that wouldn't die. He fished it out, glanced at the screen. Unknown number, probably another creditor, or maybe one of the ghosts from his past, clawing their way back. He let it go to voicemail, took a drag, and exhaled a cloud of smoke that vanished into the rain. The Orchid Lux loomed across the street, a glass and steel monolith that screamed money and secrets. Its penthouse suites were playgrounds for the city's elite. Bankers, politicians, mobsters, all pretending they weren't the same breed of vulture. Room 712 was tonight's stage, and Julian had been summoned to the show. He flicked the cigarette into a puddle and crossed the street, dodging a cab that didn't bother to slow down. The doorman, a wiry kid in a too-tight uniform, gave him a once-over but didn't ask questions. Julian's name still carried weight in Falcon Ridge, even if it was tarnished. Ex-cop turned private eye wasn't a glowing resume, but it opened doors, especially the kind that led to trouble. The lobby was all marble and gold, chandeliers dripping like frozen tears. Julian's boots left wet prints on the polished floor, earning a scowl from the concierge. He ignored her, heading straight for the elevators. A uniformed cop stood guard, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He recognized Julian and gave a curt nod. "Voss," the cop said, voice flat. "Didn't expect you here." "Life's full of disappointments, O'Malley," Julian replied, stepping into the elevator. "Room 712? "Yeah, messy one. Brass wants it wrapped up quick." "Don't they always?" The elevator hummed upward, the mirrored walls throwing back Julian's reflection. He looked older than his 38 years, the lines around his eyes carved deep by sleepless nights and bad whiskey. His dark hair was streaked with gray, a reminder of the years since he'd worn a badge, since he'd believed in justice, since Claire. He pushed the thought of her away, locking it in the vault where he kept his ghosts. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open to a hallway that smelled of money and disinfectant. Another cop stood outside room 712, this one younger, nervous, his hand hovering near his holster. "Voss?" the kid asked, squinting at him. "Who else would be dumb enough to show up?" Julian said, brushing past. The suite was a crime scene frozen in time. Victor Lemaire, CEO of Lemaire Properties and Falcon Ridge's Golden Boy, lay sprawled across the floor, his face submerged in the shallow pool that doubled as a decadent centerpiece. The water was tinged pink, rippling softly under the air conditioning. A leather belt, expensive, embossed with some designer's initials, was looped around his neck, the buckle biting into his skin. His tailored suit was immaculate, save for the water soaking his chest and the unnatural angle of his head. Julian crouched beside the body, careful not to touch anything. No signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. The room was pristine, like a stage set for a play no one had rehearsed. A bottle of bourbon sat on the bar, half empty, a single glass beside it. No lipstick marks, no second glass. If this was a party, Victor had been drinking alone. "Time of death?" Julian asked, glancing at the coroner. A gray-haired woman named Dr. Ellis, who'd seen more bodies than most cops. "Between midnight and 2 a.m., she said, not looking up from her clipboard. "No external wounds, no obvious trauma besides the ligature marks. Tox screens pending, but I'd bet my pension he was high as a kite." Julian's eyes flicked to the belt. "Self-inflicted," Ellis snorted. "Sure, if you believe he choked himself out, then decided to take a swim. No defensive wounds, no skin under his nails. Whoever did this, he didn't fight back. Or he didn't see it coming," Julian muttered. He stood scanning the room. The pool was built into the floor, a gaudy rectangle of black marble and turquoise water, maybe 6 inches deep. A king-sized bed dominated one corner, the sheets untouched. A flat-screen TV was muted, looping a news channel with Victor's face plastered across it. Tragic accident at Orchid Lux, the ticker read. Prominent CEO found dead. Accident, my ass, Julian said under his breath. Watch it, Voss, a voice growled from the doorway. Captain Hargrove, all bluster and beer gut, filled the frame. His tie was loose, his face redder than usual. This ain't your case. You're here as a courtesy. Courtesy to who? Julian asked, meeting Hargrove's glare. You closed this in 48 hours. That's a new record, even for you. Hargrove's jaw tightened. We got it handled. Overdose, probably some kinky sex game gone wrong. Happens to these rich types. You know how it is. Julian didn't blink. No signs of forced entry, no drugs on the scene. And you're calling it an overdose? We'll find the drugs, Hargrove snapped. Lab's still running tests. Now get out before I have you escorted. Julian raised his hands in mock surrender. Just taking a look, Captain. Old habits. He stepped past Hargrove, feeling the man's eyes boring into his back. The hallway was quiet now, the nervous cop gone. Julian took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the air, needing to think. The official story stank worse than the bourbon on Victor's breath. No one strangled themselves with a belt and drowned in 6 inches of water. Not unless they had help. He was halfway to his car when his phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time he answered. Voss, he said, his voice a low rasp. Mr. Voss, a woman's voice replied, cool and measured, with a faint accent he couldn't place. We need to meet. Who's this? Someone who doesn't believe Victor Lemaire died by accident. Julian stopped walking, the rain drumming on his coat. I'm listening. The Blackthorn Cafe, 1 hour, come alone. The line went dead. The Blackthorn Cafe was a dive on the edge of Falcon Ridge's old district, where the city's gloss gave way to cracked pavement and boarded up storefronts. Julian pushed through the door, the bell jangling like a warning. The place was half empty, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and grease. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on a woman in a corner booth. She was in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun and eyes that didn't blink. Her coat was expensive but worn, like she'd fallen on hard times but refused to let go of the past. Julian slid into the booth across from her. You the one who called? She nodded, her lips a thin line. Eleanor Lemaire, Victor's ex-wife. Julian leaned back, studying her. Eleanor Lemaire was a name he'd heard before, whispered in the same circles that talked about Victor's empire. A former investigative journalist, she'd made enemies exposing corruption in Falcon Ridge's banks before disappearing from the public eye. The divorce had been messy, splashed across tabloids a decade ago. She didn't look like the grieving widow type. You don't seem broken up about your ex-husband, Julian said. I'm not, she replied, her voice steady, but I know he didn't die the way they're saying. Care to elaborate? She leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. No wedding ring, no jewelry at all, just a plain silver watch, ticking softly. Victor was careful, paranoid even. He didn't do drugs, didn't trust anyone enough to let them get that close. Someone killed him, and the police are covering it up. Julian's fingers twitched for a cigarette, but he kept them still. Why me? You've got the whole city to pick from. Because you're not one of them, she said. You've seen what Falcon Ridge does to people who ask too many questions. You lost your badge for it. I lost my career. We're not so different. He let out a dry laugh. Don't get sentimental. What's in it for me? 10,000 up front. Another 20 when you find out who killed him. Julian raised an eyebrow. That's a lot of money for a woman who's been out of the game for years. I have my sources, she said, her tone sharp. Do you want the job or not? He thought about the empty bottle of whiskey in his apartment, the unpaid bills piling up on his desk. He thought about Claire, her face fading like an old photograph. He thought about the belt around Victor's neck, the water in his lungs. I'll need access, he said finally. His office, his records, his people. You'll have it, Eleanor said. She slid a manila envelope across the table. Start with this: his schedule, his contacts, and a key card to his private office at Lemaire Properties. Don't trust anyone. Julian took the envelope, feeling the weight of it in his hand. One question: why do you care? You hated the guy. Her eyes darkened, and for a moment he saw something raw beneath her composure. Because someone's trying to bury the truth, and I'm tired of watching this city win. She stood, leaving a 20 on the table for the coffee she hadn't touched. 1 hour, Mr. Voss. That's how long you have before I find someone else. Julian watched her go, the bell jangling again as the door swung shut. He opened the envelope, glancing at the contents. A typed schedule, a list of names, a key card with the Lemaire Properties logo. At the bottom, scrawled in red ink, was a single phrase: the Crimson Ledger. Chapter 2: A Foe with Many Friends. The morning broke over Falcon Ridge like a cracked egg. Gray and runny, the city's skyline smudged against a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain or just give up. Julian Voss sat in his car outside Lemaire Properties headquarters, a glass tower that stabbed at the clouds like it had a personal grudge. The keycard Eleanor had given him sat on the passenger seat, glinting in the weak light. He hadn't slept, hadn't even tried. Sleep was for people who didn't see ghosts in every shadow. He drained the last of his coffee, cold and bitter, and checked the envelope again. Victor Lemaire's schedule was meticulous, every hour accounted for. Breakfast meetings with councilmen, late-night calls with overseas investors, a charity gala where he'd smiled for the cameras while shaking hands with men who'd sell their own kids for a percentage point. The list of contacts was shorter, but no less telling. Names Julian recognized from headlines and whispered rumors. Victor hadn't just run a real estate empire. He'd been a spider at the center of Falcon Ridge's web, and now someone had cut his threads. Julian tucked the envelope into his coat and stepped out into the drizzle. The tower's lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all polished granite and abstract art that probably cost more than his apartment. The receptionist, a blonde with a smile as fake as her nails, eyed him like he was something the janitor forgot to sweep up. "Julian Voss," he said, flashing the key card. "Here to see Ms. Carver." The receptionist's smile didn't waver, but her eyes flicked to a security guard by the elevators. "Do you have an appointment?" "Don't need one," Julian said, leaning on the counter just enough to make her flinch. "Victor Lemaire's office. I've got access." Her fingers hesitated over the phone, then she nodded. 11th floor. Ms. Carver's expecting you." The elevator ride was silent except for the hum of machinery and the faint rattle of Julian's thoughts. Abigail Carver was Victor's personal assistant, the gatekeeper to his world. If anyone knew what Victor had been up to before he ended up face down in a pool, it was her. The 11th floor was all glass walls and open-plan desks, a hive of activity where suits moved like drones, their voices low and urgent. Abigail Carver's office was at the far end, a corner suite with a view of the city's heart. She stood as Julian entered, a tall woman in her early 30s, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. Her suit was tailored to intimidate, and her eyes were sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Voss," she said, extending a hand that felt more like a challenge than a greeting. "I was told you'd be coming, though I'm not sure why." "Victor's dead," Julian said, skipping the pleasantries. "I'm here to find out who made it happen." Her expression didn't change, but her fingers twitched just for a second. "The police said it was an accident. Overdose, maybe. Tragic, but not suspicious." "Police say a lot of things," Julian replied, settling into the chair across from her desk without being invited. "I'm more interested in what you say." Abigail sat, folding her hands on the desk. "I don't know what you expect to find. Victor was complicated. Brilliant, driven, but complicated." "Complicated how?" Julian asked, his voice low, probing. He watched her closely, noting the way her eyes flicked to the side, the slight tightening of her jaw. "He had enemies," she said finally. "You don't build an empire like Lemaire Properties without stepping on toes. Competitors, regulators, even his own board. But no one hated him enough to kill him." Julian leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Let's talk about the board. Who's got the most to gain with Victor gone?" Abigail hesitated, then opened a drawer and pulled out a tablet. She swiped through a few screens before turning it toward him. The board's been restless for months. Victor was pushing aggressive expansions, new developments, offshore accounts. Not everyone was on board. Names, Julian said. She sighed like she was humoring him. Daniel Hargrove, our CFO, he thought Victor was over-leveraging the company, risking too much. They fought about it constantly. Hargrove, Julian repeated, the name ringing a bell. Not just the CFO, but the brother of Captain Hargrove, the cop who'd been so eager to close Victor's case. Coincidence was a word Julian didn't trust. Who else? He pressed. Rebecca Stein, head of acquisitions. She and Victor were close. Too close, some said. She wanted more control, thought she deserved it. And then there's Marcus Tate, our legal counsel. He's been with Victor since the beginning, but lately, let's just say he wasn't happy about some of Victor's side deals. Side deals? Julian's voice was sharp now, like a blade catching the light. Abigail's lips pressed into a thin line. Victor had interests outside the company, investments, partnerships. He didn't always share the details, even with me. Julian let that sit, the silence heavy. Abigail was holding back, but pushing her now would only make her clam up. He stood, slipping the keycard into his pocket. I'll need access to Victor's office. Now. She nodded, standing to lead him down the hall. Victor's office was a fortress of dark wood and leather, a stark contrast to the glass and steel aesthetic outside. The desk was massive, polished to a mirror shine, with a single laptop and a stack of files. A framed photo sat on a shelf. Victor, younger, smiling with a woman Julian recognized as Eleanor. The photo was old, the edges yellowed, but Victor's grin was the same one plastered on billboards across Falcon Ridge. Abigail lingered in the doorway. Anything else, Mr. Voss? Yeah, he said, not looking at her. Don't leave town. She didn't reply, but he heard the click of her heels as she walked away. Julian spent an hour in Victor's office, combing through files that told him nothing new. Contracts, permits, emails about zoning laws. The laptop was locked, its screen demanding a password he didn't have. He'd need to get it to someone who could crack it, but that was a problem for later. For now he had names, and names were threads he could pull. Daniel Hargrove was next. The CFO's office was 2 floors down, a sterile box with spreadsheets pinned to the walls like battle plans. Hargrove was in his 50s, balding, with the kind of paunch that came from too many expense account lunches. He didn't stand when Julian entered, just waved him to a chair with a meaty hand. Voss, right, Hargrove said, his voice thick with the city's accent. Heard you were sniffing around. Waste of time, if you ask me. I didn't, Julian said, sitting anyway. You and Victor were at odds. Care to explain? Hargrove's eyes narrowed, but he leaned back, folding his arms. Victor was reckless, throwing money at projects we couldn't afford. Dubai, Singapore, that goddamn waterfront deal. I told him we'd go bankrupt, but he didn't listen. Said he had investors who'd cover it. Investors, Julian echoed. Like who? Hargrove shrugged, but his eyes darted to the side. He never said. Offshore types, probably. Victor liked his secrets. Julian leaned forward, his voice dropping. You're the CFO. You don't get to play dumb about where the money comes from. Hargrove's face reddened. You calling me a liar? I'm calling you a man with a motive, Julian said. Victor's dead, and suddenly you're the one signing the checks. That's a nice step up. Hargrove slammed a fist on the desk, papers rattling. I didn't kill him. Yeah, we fought, but I wasn't the only one. Ask Rebecca. She was always whispering in his ear, pushing him to take bigger risks. If anyone wanted him gone, it was her. Julian filed that away. What about Marcus Tate? Hargrove snorted. Tate's a snake, loyal to Victor for years, but lately, he was asking too many questions about Victor's consulting gigs. Thought he was getting cut out. Julian stood, his shadow falling across Hargrove's desk. One last thing. Your brother, Captain Hargrove, he closed Victor's case in record time. Any chance he was doing you a favor? Hargrove's face went from red to purple. Get the hell out of my office. Julian didn't argue. He'd gotten what he came for. A crack in the facade, a hint of the rot beneath. Rebecca Stein was a different animal. Her office was a shrine to ambition, walls lined with awards and photos of her shaking hands with Falcon Ridge's elite. She was younger than Julian expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that didn't miss a thing. She greeted him with a smile that was all teeth, like a shark circling prey. "Mr. Voss," she said, leaning against her desk, "Abigail warned me you'd be trouble." "Good," Julian replied, not sitting this time. "Means I'm doing my job. You and Victor were close." "How close?" Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes hardened. "Close enough to know his mind, not close enough to share his bed, if that's what you're implying." "Wasn't," Julian said, though he had been. "But you wanted more power. He was holding you back." Rebecca laughed, a sharp sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Victor didn't hold anyone back. He pushed us all, too hard sometimes. He was, relentless. But I didn't need him dead to get what I wanted. I was already running acquisitions." "Then why the rumors?" Julian asked. "People say you were after his chair." "People say a lot of things," she shot back. "Victor trusted me. More than he trusted Daniel, that's for sure. Or Marcus, with his endless legal memos. If you're looking for someone with a grudge, try them." Julian nodded, letting her think she'd deflected him. "One more thing. Victor's investors. You know anything about them?" Her smile slipped, just for a second. "He kept that side of the business private, even from me." "Convenient," Julian said, turning to leave. He felt her eyes on him as he walked out, like a spotlight he couldn't shake. Marcus Tate was the last stop, and the hardest to pin down. His office was a maze of legal books and file cabinets, the air thick with the smell of old paper and stale coffee. Tate was older, maybe 60, with a hawkish face and glasses that magnified his eyes into something almost predatory. He didn't look up when Julian entered, just kept scribbling on a legal pad. "Voss," Tate said, his voice dry as dust, "I don't have time for this." "Make time," Julian said, dropping into a chair. "Victor's dead, and you're one of the last people who saw him alive. Start talking." Tate set down his pen, his eyes meeting Julian's. "Victor was a client and a friend. His death was a tragedy, but I don't know anything about it." "You were his lawyer," Julian said. "You knew his deals, his enemies. You telling me you've got nothing?" Tate leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Victor was incautious. He made deals with people he shouldn't have. People who don't take kindly to being crossed." "Like who?" Julian pressed. Tate's eyes flicked to the door, then back to Julian. "I don't know names, but I heard things. Whispers about a ledger, some kind of record Victor kept. He called it insurance, said it would protect him if things went south." Julian's pulse quickened, but he kept his face blank. "A ledger. Where is it?" Tate shook his head. "If I knew, I wouldn't be sitting here. But if you're smart, you'll stop asking questions. Some things are better left buried." Julian stood, his shadow falling across Tate's desk. "Thanks for the advice. I'll let you know if I take it." Back in his car, Julian lit a cigarette and let the smoke curl around his thoughts. Abigail, Hargrove, Rebecca, Tate. Every one of them had a reason to want Victor gone. Money, power, betrayal, or all three. And then there was the ledger, a ghost of a clue that kept surfacing, like a body that wouldn't stay submerged. Eleanor had mentioned it, and now Tate. Whatever it was the key to this mess. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. Frankie, a hacker who owed him a favor, picked up on the third ring. "Voss," Frankie said, his voice a mix of irritation and amusement. "What's it this time?" "I need a laptop cracked," Julian said, "and I need it fast. Send it over, but you owe me." "Story of my life," Julian muttered, hanging up. The rain was heavier now, pounding the windshield like it wanted in. Julian stared at the city beyond, its lights flickering like a dying pulse. Victor Lemaire had enemies, all right. The trick was figuring out which one had pulled the trigger, or in this case, the belt. He tucked the envelope into his coat and stepped back into the rain. Falcon Ridge was a city of shadows, and he was about to step into the darkest one yet. Chapter 3. Blood in the gold Falcon Ridge at night was a beast with too many teeth. The city's underbelly pulsed beneath its polished surface, a labyrinth of backroom deals and blood money that never saw the light of day. Julian Voss drove through the old industrial district, where rusted warehouses stood like tombstones for a city that had sold its soul long ago. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the sodium glow of streetlights. His cigarette burned low, the ash falling onto the passenger seat where Victor's laptop sat, still locked, still silent. Frankie had promised to crack it by morning, but Julian wasn't holding his breath. The hacker was good, but Victor Lemaire hadn't built an empire by being careless. Whatever secrets the laptop held, they were buried deep, and Julian had a feeling they were tied to the whispers he'd heard from Marcus Tate. The Crimson Ledger, a record that could burn Falcon Ridge to the ground. He pulled into a gravel lot behind a derelict factory, its windows boarded up, its walls tagged with graffiti that looked like war cries. The contact Eleanor had slipped him, a name scrawled on a napkin in the envelope, was waiting inside. Ivan Korsakov, a Russian expat with a rap sheet longer than Julian's bar tab. Weapons dealer, smuggler, and, if the rumors were true, one of Victor's shadier business partners. If anyone knew about Victor's off-the-books deals, it was him. Julian killed the engine and checked his revolver, a snub-nosed .38 he hadn't fired in years, but still carried like a bad habit. The weight of it in his coat pocket was a small comfort, though he knew it wouldn't mean much if things went south. Men like Korsakov didn't play by rules. They played by power. The factory door creaked as he pushed it open, the air inside thick with the smell of oil and decay. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting long shadows across crates stacked like a maze. Korsakov sat at a metal table in the center, a bear of a man with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his ear to his jaw like a fault line. He was cleaning a disassembled pistol, his hands moving with the precision of a surgeon. Two goons stood behind him, their eyes locked on Julian, hands resting on holsters. "Boss," Korsakov said, his accent heavy, his voice like gravel in a blender. "You're late." "Traffic," Julian lied, stopping a few feet from the table. "You're Ivan?" Korsakov didn't look up, just kept wiping down the pistol slide. "You know who I am. Question is, why you here? Victor's dead. Business is closed." "Not for me," Julian said, keeping his tone even. "I'm looking into how he ended up that way. Word is, you and Victor were tight. Maybe you know something." Korsakov's laugh was a low rumble, like a storm rolling in. "Tight? Victor was a snake. He'd sell his own mother if the price was right, but he paid well, so I didn't complain." "Paid for what?" Julian asked, his eyes flicking to the goons. One of them shifted, his jacket opening just enough to show the glint of a knife. Korsakov set the pistol down, finally meeting Julian's gaze. His eyes were cold, the kind that had seen too many bodies to care about one more. "You're a cop, Voss, or you were. You think I'm gonna spill my guts because you ask nice?" "Not a cop anymore," Julian said, "and I'm not asking nice. Victor was into something dirty, dirtier than your usual hustle. I'm betting it's why he's dead. You want to be next?" Korsakov's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "You got balls, I'll give you that. But you're fishing in deep water." Victor wasn't just moving condos and office towers. He was cleaning money, big money for people who don't like questions. Julian's pulse quickened, but he kept his face stone. "Mafia?" Korsakov shrugged, a lazy gesture that didn't match the tension in the room. "Call it what you want. Italians, Russians, Chinese. It's all the same. Victor had a knack for making dirty cash look clean. Real estate's perfect for it. Buy a building, sell it, move the money through a dozen shell companies. By the time anyone notices, it's gone." Julian leaned against a crate, casual, like he wasn't standing in a room with three men who could kill him without blinking. "And you were part of it?" Korsakov's smile faded. "I moved product. Guns mostly. Victor made sure the payments didn't raise flags. We had an understanding." "Until?" Julian prompted. "Until he got greedy," Korsakov said, his voice dropping to a growl. "Started keeping a record, a ledger. Thought it would protect him if things went bad. Called it his insurance policy. Stupid move. You don't blackmail people like us." The Crimson Ledger again. Julian's mind raced, connecting dots. Victor had been playing a dangerous game, holding leverage over men who'd slit their own throats before letting someone expose them. "Where's the ledger now?" he asked. Korsakov laughed again, this time colder. If I knew, you think I'd be sitting here? It's gone, Voss, and good riddance. But people are looking for it. People who don't ask questions. They just shoot. Who? Julian pressed, stepping closer despite the goon's glares. Korsakov stood, towering over the table. You're asking the wrong man. But I'll give you a name for free. Tommy Vega. Runs a club downtown, the Red Veil. Victor met him a week before he died. If anyone knows what Victor was hiding, it's him. Julian nodded, filing the name away. One more thing. You think Vega killed him? Korsakov picked up the pistol slide, snapping it back into place with a click that echoed in the silence. I think Victor had a lot of friends who weren't friendly. You're smart. You'll stop digging before you find out how many. The goon stepped forward, a silent signal that the meeting was over. Julian didn't argue. He backed toward the door, his hand brushing the revolver in his pocket. Thanks for the chat, Ivan. Let's not do it again. Outside, the air felt colder, the city's pulse heavier. Julian lit another cigarette, his hands steady despite the adrenaline humming through him. Korsakov had confirmed what he'd suspected. Victor was neck-deep in the kind of deals that got men killed. Money laundering for the mafia wasn't a side hustle. It was a death sentence. And the Crimson Ledger, whatever it was the key to unlocking who'd pulled the trigger, or tightened the belt. The Red Veil was a neon scar on the edge of Falcon Ridge's nightlife district, its sign bleeding crimson light onto the wet pavement. Julian parked a block away, the laptop still in his car, a ticking bomb he couldn't leave unattended. He'd called Frankie again, promising double the usual rate if he could crack it by dawn. For now, Tommy Vega was his next lead. The club was packed, the air thick with smoke and the thump of bass that rattled Julian's teeth. Men in suits mingled with women in dresses that left nothing to the imagination, their laughter sharp and brittle. Julian pushed through the crowd, his trench coat drawing stares. He didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. Vega was in a VIP booth at the back, flanked by two women who looked like they'd been hired for the night. He was younger than Julian expected, maybe late 30s with slicked back hair and a suit that screamed money. His eyes locked on Julian the moment he approached, like a predator spotting prey. Tommy Vega? Julian asked, standing at the edge of the booth. Who's asking? Vega's voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it, like a blade wrapped in silk. Julian Voss, I'm looking into Victor Lemaire's death. Heard you two had a meeting last week. Vega's smile was slow, calculated. Victor, yeah, sad what happened, but I don't know nothing about it. Funny, Julian said, leaning in, because I heard you were one of the last people to see him alive. Care to share what you talked about? The women giggled, but Vega's smile didn't waver. He waved them off and they slunk away, leaving the booth empty except for the two men. You're a PI, right? Used to be a cop. Word gets around. Why don't you sit, have a drink? On me. I don't drink on the job, Julian lied. What was Victor to you? Vega sipped his whiskey, his eyes never leaving Julian's. A business partner. Real estate mostly. He had a way of making things happen. Permits, zoning, you name it. We worked on a few deals together. Like laundering money? Julian asked, his voice low enough to blend with the music. Vega's glass paused halfway to his lips. Careful, Voss. You start throwing around accusations like that, you might not walk out of here. Julian didn't flinch. I'm not accusing, I'm asking. Victor was moving dirty money and you were part of it. What I want to know is, did he cross you, or did someone else get to him first? Vega set the glass down, his smile gone. You're out of your depth, Voss. Victor was playing with fire, yeah, but he was smart, kept records, covered his tracks. If someone killed him, it wasn't because he was sloppy, it was because they wanted something he had. The Crimson Ledger, Julian said, testing the waters. Vega's eyes narrowed, just for a second, but it was enough. You've been talking to the wrong people. That ledger's a myth. Victor liked to talk big, make people think he had an ace up his sleeve, but if it was real, it's long gone, and you should hope it stays that way. Julian leaned closer, his voice a whisper. Who's looking for it? Vega laughed, but it was hollow. Everyone, cops, crooks, politicians. You name it, they want a piece. Victor didn't just have enemies, He had a whole city ready to carve him up. Julian stood, his mind racing. Vega knew more than he was letting on, but pushing him here, in his own club, was a losing game. "Thanks for the tip," he said. "I'll be in touch." "Don't count on it," Vega replied, already waving the women back. Back in his car, Julian's phone buzzed. "Frankie, right on time." He answered, his voice tight. "Tell me you've got something." "Laptop's a fortress," Frankie said, sounding more excited than annoyed. "Military-grade encryption, the works. But I'm close. Found a backdoor in the firmware. Give me a few hours, I'll have it open." "Make it quick," Julian said, hanging up. He stared at the city's skyline, the lights blurring as his thoughts churned. Victor had been laundering money for the mafia, keeping a ledger that could expose half of Falcon Ridge's power players. Korsakov and Vega both knew about it, but neither had it, or so they claimed. And then there was Eleanor, the ex-wife with her own agenda, dangling 10 grand and a key card like bait. Julian's thoughts drifted to Claire, unbidden, her face flickering in his mind like a bad film reel. She'd vanished 3 years ago, leaving nothing but a note and a hole in his chest. He'd spent months chasing leads that went nowhere, drowning in whiskey and regret. This case felt the same. Too many threads, too many lies. But he couldn't stop. Not yet. He started the car, the engine growling to life. The Crimson Ledger was out there, and so was Victor's killer. In Falcon Ridge, the truth was a currency more dangerous than gold, and Julian was already in too deep to walk away. Chapter 4. The Woman Who Didn't Smile. The city never slept, but it dreamed in shadows. Falcon Ridge's skyline glittered beyond Julian Voss's windshield, a mosaic of lies built on steel and glass. He drove through the old newspaper district, where printing presses once roared but now sat silent, their buildings gutted or turned into overpriced lofts. The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m., but sleep was a luxury Julian hadn't afforded in years. His hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, the weight of Victor Lemaire's laptop in the trunk, a constant reminder of the secrets he hadn't yet cracked. Frankie had texted an hour ago, "Laptop's fighting me. Need another day." Julian hadn't replied. Time was a noose tightening around his neck, and every lead he chased seemed to pull it tighter. Korsakov's warning echoed in his head. People who don't ask questions, they just shoot. But it was Eleanor Lemaire's voice that haunted him most. Her cool detachment, her cryptic note about the Crimson Ledger, the way her eyes had burned with something he couldn't name. Grief, revenge, or something colder. He pulled into a diner on the edge of the district, a greasy spoon called the Lantern, its neon sign flickering like a dying star. Eleanor had agreed to meet him here, a place far enough from the city's power centers to avoid prying eyes. Julian needed answers, and she was the only one who'd been straight with him, so far as he could tell. But trust in Falcon Ridge was a fool's bet, and Julian hadn't been a fool in a long time. Inside, the diner smelled of burnt coffee and stale cigarettes, the kind of place where the jukebox played songs no one remembered. Eleanor sat in a booth near the back, her coat draped over the seat like a shield. She didn't look up as Julian approached, just stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the mug. Her face was a mask, no trace of the smile most people wore to hide their edges. Eleanor Lemaire didn't hide hers. She sharpened them. "Voss," she said, her voice low, precise. "You're late." "Had a long night," Julian replied, sliding into the booth. "You want to tell me why I'm here?" Her eyes met his, dark and unyielding, like the city itself. "You've been asking questions. Korsakov, Vega, you're stirring up trouble." "That's my job," Julian said, leaning back. "Your ex-husband was neck-deep in dirty money, mafia, offshore accounts, the works, and everyone keeps mentioning a ledger. Your ledger, I'm guessing." Eleanor's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to make Julian's skin prickle. "You're quick, but you're not as smart as you think. The Crimson Ledger isn't mine. It was Victor's. His insurance, his blackmail book. Every deal, every name, every dollar he washed for the vultures in this city." Julian's fingers itched for a cigarette, but he kept them still. "And you know this how?" She sipped her coffee, her movements deliberate. "I was a journalist, Mr. Voss. A good one. Before Victor, before the divorce, I spent years digging into Falcon Ridge's banks. The shell companies, the wire transfers, the politicians who looked the other way. I got too close, and it cost me everything. Julian studied her, the lines around her eyes, the way her hands stayed steady despite the weight of her words. He'd done his homework after their first meeting, pulling old articles from the Falcon Ridge Herald archives. Eleanor Lemaire had been a firebrand, her exposés on banking fraud and city corruption, making waves a decade ago. She'd named names, councilmen, CEOs, even a few cops. Then she'd gone after Victor's empire, and her career imploded. Lawsuits, smear campaigns, a nervous breakdown splashed across tabloids. The official story was she'd burned out, but Julian smelled a cover-up. "You think Victor's death is tied to your old stories?" he said, not a question. "I know it is," she replied, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Victor didn't just launder money, he was the linchpin. The banks, the mafia, the city hall, they all needed him. But he got greedy, started keeping records. The ledger was his leverage, his way to keep them in line. Someone decided he was too dangerous to keep alive." Julian leaned forward, his voice low. "And you? What's your angle? You didn't love him. Why hire me? Why not let the city bury him and move on?" For the first time, Eleanor's mask slipped, a flicker of something raw crossing her face. "Because I'm tired of losing. Victor took everything from me, my career, my reputation, my life. If someone killed him, I want to know who, and I want them to pay." Her words hung between them, heavy as the diner's air. Julian didn't trust her, not completely. Revenge was a motive as old as blood, and Eleanor had it in spades. She'd handed him the key card, the contacts, the money. But what was she holding back? "You're not telling me everything," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "You were a journalist. You know how this works. If you're using me to settle a score, I'll walk." She didn't flinch. "You won't walk. You're too stubborn, and you're too broke. 10,000's a lot of whiskey, Mr. Voss." He let out a dry laugh, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Fair enough, but if you're playing me, you'll regret it." Eleanor pushed her coffee aside untouched and slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "This is the last place Victor was seen before the Orchid Lux. A private club, the Gilded Cage. Members only, old money and older grudges. He met someone there the night he died. Find out who." Julian took the paper, his fingers brushing hers. Her skin was cold, like she'd been carved from the city's concrete. He unfolded it, revealing an address and a name. Edward Langston. No title, no context, just a name that carried weight in Falcon Ridge's elite circles. Langston was old money, a patriarch who'd built half the city's skyline before Victor was even born. "Why Langston?" Julian asked. "He hated Victor," Eleanor said simply. "They were partners once, years ago. Victor betrayed him, took a deal that should have been Langston's. If anyone had a reason to want him dead, it's him." Julian pocketed the paper, his mind already turning. "You've got a lot of enemies for a woman who's been out of the game for years." Her eyes darkened, and for a moment, he saw the journalist she'd been, sharp, relentless, dangerous. "In this city, enemies are the only thing you can count on." She stood, leaving a crumpled 20 on the table, and walked out without looking back. The bell above the door jangled, and she was gone, swallowed by the night. The Gilded Cage was a fortress disguised as a gentleman's club, tucked away in Falcon Ridge's historic district. Its stone facade loomed like a cathedral, windows dark, the air heavy with the scent of old money and older sins. Julian parked a block away, his revolver a familiar weight in his coat. The keycard to Victor's office was still in his pocket, but it wouldn't get him in here. Places like this didn't open for men like him. They opened for power. He circled the building, sticking to the shadows until he found a service entrance half hidden behind a dumpster. The lock was old, rusted, and gave way with a few minutes of work and a pick he'd carried since his cop days. Inside, the air was cool, the silence oppressive. The hallway was lined with oak paneling, portraits of dead men staring down like judges. Julian moved quietly, his boots silent on the carpet. Voices drifted from a room ahead, low and heated. He pressed himself against the wall, listening. Can't just sit on this, a man's voice said, sharp, impatient. If it's out there, we're all exposed. Calm down, Edward, another voice replied, older, smoother. Victor's dead. The problem's solved. Is it? The first voice snapped. You think he didn't have copies? You think he didn't plan for this? Julian's pulse quickened. Edward Langston. He edged closer, peering through a crack in the door. Two men sat at a mahogany table, a bottle of scotch between them. Langston was in his 60s, silver hair swept back, his face carved with the kind of arrogance only wealth could buy. The other man was younger, lean, with eyes that darted like a cornered animal's. Julian didn't recognize him, but he filed the face away. The ledger's a myth, Langston said, his voice dripping with disdain. Victor's ghost story to keep us in line. If it was real, we'd have found it by now. Then why are people still looking? The younger man asked, his voice tight. Vega, Korsakov, even the cops. Someone's got it, Edward, and if they talk, they won't, Langston cut him off. Not if we handle it, like we handled Victor. Julian's breath caught, his hand brushing the revolver. He wanted to barge in, demand answers, but he wasn't that reckless, not yet. Instead, he pulled out his phone, switched it to silent, and snapped a photo through the crack. The image was grainy, but it would do. Evidence, or at least a start. Footsteps echoed behind him, heavy and deliberate. Julian slipped into a side room, heart pounding, as a security guard passed, his flashlight cutting through the dark. The guard didn't stop, didn't notice, but Julian knew his luck wouldn't hold forever. He waited until the hallway was clear, then retraced his steps to the service entrance. The night air hit him like a slap, cold and sharp. Langston's words replayed in his head, like we handled Victor. Not a confession, but close enough to make Julian's blood run hot. If Langston was involved, this case was bigger than a single murder. It was a conspiracy that could crack Falcon Ridge wide open. Back in his apartment, Julian poured a whiskey, the bottle lighter than he'd like. The room was a mess, unpaid bills on the table, a half-empty pack of cigarettes, a photo of Claire tucked under a stack of case files. He pushed it aside, focusing on the paper Eleanor had given him. Edward Langston. Old money, old grudges. If he'd been Victor's partner, he'd have known about the money laundering, maybe even profited from it. But why kill Victor now after years of bad blood? Julian's phone buzzed. Frankie again. He answered, his voice rough. Tell me you've got something. I'm in, Frankie said, his excitement palpable. Laptop's open. Most of it's encrypted files, financials, contracts. But there's one folder labeled CL. Couldn't crack it yet, but I'm betting it's your ledger. Julian's grip tightened on the phone. Send me what you've got and keep digging. Already on it, Frankie said. But Voss, this thing's radioactive. Whoever Victor was dealing with, they're not small time. Watch your back. Julian hung up, his eyes drifting to the city beyond his window. Falcon Ridge was a machine, grinding down anyone who got too close to its gears. Eleanor had pointed him at Langston, but she'd known about the ledger from the start. Was she leading him to the truth or setting him up to take the fall? He thought of Claire again, her absence a wound that never healed. She'd believed in the truth once, just like Eleanor had, and it had destroyed her. Julian downed the whiskey, the burn steadying him. He didn't trust Eleanor, didn't trust Langston, didn't trust anyone. But the Crimson Ledger was out there, and so was Victor's killer. In Falcon Ridge, the only way out was through. Chapter 5, The Crimson Ledger. The city of Falcon Ridge was a beast that thrived in the dark, its veins pulsing with secrets and blood money. At 4 a.m., the streets were a graveyard of neon and asphalt, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Julian Voss sat in his car outside First National Bank, a monolith of glass and stone that guarded the city's wealth like a dragon hoarding gold. His cigarette burned low, the ash dusting his coat as he stared at the bank's entrance. The keycard Eleanor had given him was useless here, but the slip of paper she tucked into the envelope, a safe deposit box number and a PIN, was his ticket to answers, or a trap. Victor Lemaire's laptop, still locked tight in his trunk, had yielded nothing but Frankie's promises and a folder labeled CL that mocked him with its encryption. The Crimson Ledger was more than a rumor now. It was a specter haunting every lead. Korsakov's warnings, Vega's deflections, Langston's smug assurances. If Victor had left a clue to its whereabouts, it was in that safe deposit box. Julian just had to get to it before someone else did. He stubbed out the cigarette and stepped into the night, his revolver a cold weight in his coat. The bank was closed, but Eleanor had been specific. After hours, use the side entrance. The PIN will get you in. Her confidence unnerved him. She knew too much, moved too easily in a city that chewed up trust and spit it out. But Julian was in too deep to turn back now, and the truth was a drug he couldn't quit. The side entrance was a steel door tucked in an alley, its keypad glowing faintly in the dark. Julian punched in the PIN, 7129, and the lock clicked open with a sound that felt too loud in the silence. Inside, the bank was a maze of shadows, the air thick with the smell of polished marble and money. He moved quickly, following Eleanor's directions to the vault level, his boots silent on the carpeted stairs. The safe deposit room was a fortress of steel boxes, each one a secret waiting to be cracked. Julian found box 712, the number matching the Orchid Lux room where Victor had died. Coincidence was a word Julian didn't trust, not in Falconridge. He entered the PIN again, and the box slid open with a soft hiss. Inside was a single USB drive, black and unassuming, its surface scratched like it had been handled too many times. No note, no label, just the drive and the weight of what it might hold. Julian pocketed it, his pulse ticking up, the Crimson Ledger, or a piece of it. He was about to close the box when he heard it, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing from the hallway above. He froze, his hand brushing the revolver. The bank was supposed to be empty, but in Falconridge, nothing was ever what it seemed. He slipped into the shadows behind a row of boxes, his breath shallow. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by low voices, clipped and urgent. 2 men, maybe 3. Julian peered around the corner, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Uniforms, cops, but not the kind who patrolled beats. These were tactical black vests and gloves, moving like they owned the place. One held a flashlight, its beam sweeping the room. The other clutched a silenced pistol. "Check the vault," the first cop said, his voice low but familiar. Julian's gut twisted. O'Malley, the uniform from the Orchid Lux, the one who'd let him into room 712 without a fight. "He's here," the second cop said, younger, nervous. "The alarm tripped 10 minutes ago. Whoever it is, they're not getting out." Julian's mind raced. An alarm he hadn't triggered. A setup. Eleanor's PIN had worked too easily, her directions too precise. Had she sent him here to die? He crouched lower, the USB drive burning a hole in his pocket. The cops moved closer, their boots scuffing the floor. O'Malley's flashlight swept past, missing Julian by inches. "Box 712, O'Malley said, stopping at the open safe. "It's been accessed. Shit." "Call it in?" the younger cop asked. "Not yet," O'Malley snapped. "We handle this ourselves. No one else needs to know." Julian's blood ran cold. Handle this ourselves. These weren't just dirty cops. They were in deep, tied to whatever Victor had been hiding. The Crimson Ledger wasn't just a record. It was a death warrant, and Julian was holding it. He weighed his options. Stay hidden and hope they left, or make a move and risk a bullet. The revolver in his coat felt heavier now, a choice he didn't want to make. But Falconridge didn't care about what he wanted. It cared about survival. He waited until O'Malley turned, his flashlight pointed at the far wall, then bolted for the stairs. The younger cop shouted, but Julian was already moving, his boots pounding the marble. A silenced shot hissed past his ear, chipping the wall. He didn't look back, just dove through the side door and into the alley, the cold air hitting him like a slap. The street was empty, but headlights flared in the distance. Another car moving fast. Julian sprinted to his own, diving behind the wheel as tires screeched behind him. He gunned the engine, the car lurching onto the road, the USB drive a lead weight in his pocket. The headlights followed, closing in, a black SUV with no plates. Cops or worse, it didn't matter. They wanted what he had, and they weren't asking nicely. The chase tore through Falcon Ridge's back streets, Julian weaving through alleys and cutting across empty lots. The SUV stayed on him, its driver relentless, headlights blinding in the rear view. Julian's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. O'Malley wasn't just a grunt. He was connected, part of the same web Victor had spun. And Eleanor, had she known? Had she sent him into an ambush? He took a sharp turn, tires screaming, and floored it toward the industrial district. The warehouses there were a maze, a place to lose a tail or die trying. The SUV clipped his bumper, jolting him forward, but Julian held the wheel, his knuckles white. He spotted a narrow gap between two buildings and yanked the wheel, scraping the car's side as he squeezed through. The SUV couldn't follow, its bulk too wide, and Julian heard the screech of brakes as it skidded to a stop. He didn't slow down, not until the warehouse shadow swallowed him. He pulled into a loading bay, killed the engine, and sat there, heart pounding. The USB drive clutched in his hand. The city's pulse thrummed around him, a reminder that he was still alive. For now. Julian didn't go home. His apartment wasn't safe, not with cops like O'Malley on the hunt. Instead, he drove to Frankie's place, a rundown loft above a pawn shop that smelled of solder and desperation. Frankie was waiting, his laptop glowing in the dark, a mess of cables spilling across the table like entrails. "You look like shit," Frankie said, not looking up from the screen. "Feel like it," Julian replied, tossing the USB drive onto the table. "Got this from Victor's safe deposit box. Tell me it's worth almost dying for." Frankie's eyes lit up, his fingers snatching the drive like a kid with a new toy. "Holy shit, Voss, you don't mess around." He plugged it into his rig, the screen flickering with code. Same encryption as the laptop. This guy was paranoid. Had reason to be, Julian said, lighting a cigarette despite Frankie's scowl. "Cops ambushed me at the bank, not the good kind." Frankie's hands paused, his eyes flicking to Julian. "Cops? Like official?" "Like O'Malley," Julian said, exhaling smoke. "He was at the Orchid Lux. Now he's breaking into banks in the middle of the night. Someone's paying him to keep this quiet." Frankie whistled low, turning back to the screen. "This drive's got one file, labeled CL-001. It's big, terabytes maybe, but it's locked tighter than the laptop. I'll need time." "How much?" Julian asked, his voice rough. 6 hours, maybe 8, Frankie said. "But Voss, this is next level. If this is the ledger, it's not just numbers. It's names, dates, accounts. The kind of shit that gets people killed." Julian nodded, his mind already elsewhere. O'Malley's presence at the bank wasn't a coincidence. He was tied to Victor, to the ledger, to the same rot that ran through Falcon Ridge's core. And Eleanor, she'd sent him there, known the PIN, known the box number. Was she playing him, or was she just another pawn in a game too big for either of them? "Keep it quiet," Julian said, standing, "and don't answer the door unless it's me." "Where are you going?" Frankie asked, his voice tinged with worry. "To find out who's pulling the strings," Julian said, heading for the door. The Blackthorn Cafe was empty except for a lone waitress wiping down the counter, her eyes glazed with boredom. Julian slid into the same booth where he'd met Eleanor, the memory of her cold stare lingering like a ghost. He dialed her number, the one she'd used to call him. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. Instead, he pulled out the paper she'd given him, the one with Langston's name and the Gilded Cage address. He'd heard enough from Langston's own mouth to know the man was dirty, but Eleanor's role was still a question mark. He called another number, one he hadn't used in years. Detective Sarah Klein, one of the few cops he still trusted, picked up on the fourth ring. "Voss," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "It's 5 in the morning. This better be good." "O'Malley," Julian said, cutting to the chase. "What's his deal?" Klein went quiet, the kind of silence that carried weight. "He's trouble. Been on the take for years, but no one can prove it." "Why?" "He tried to kill me tonight," Julian said, keeping his voice low. "At First National. He's tied to Victor Lemaire's murder." Klein's breath hissed through the phone. "Jesus, Voss, you're poking a hornet's nest. O'Malley's got friends, high up. Captain Hargrove, for one." Julian's grip tightened on the phone. Hargrove, the same captain who'd shut down Victor's case in 48 hours. Daniel Hargrove's brother, the CFO, who'd fought with Victor over money. The web was tightening, and Julian was caught in it. "Any chatter about a ledger?" he asked. "Nothing solid," Klein said, "but there's been talk. Off-the-books deals, names no one dares say out loud. If Lemaire had something like that, it'd explain why O'Malley's running scared." "Thanks, Sarah," Julian said, hanging up before she could ask questions he didn't want to answer. He stared out the diner's window, the city's lights blurring into streaks of red and blue. O'Malley was a symptom, not the disease. Someone higher up was pulling his strings. Someone with enough power to bury a murder and hunt a PI without blinking. Eleanor had pointed him at Langston, at the ledger, but she'd also sent him into an ambush. Was she a victim, a mastermind, or just another ghost in Falcon Ridge's machine? His phone buzzed. A text from Frankie. "Drive's opening. It's bad, Voss. Really bad." Julian's heart sank. The Crimson Ledger was real, and it was a bomb waiting to go off. He stood, tossing a crumpled bill on the table, and stepped back into the night. Falcon Ridge was watching, and it didn't like what it saw. Chapter 6. The Cut in the Mirror. Falcon Ridge was a city of mirrors, reflecting wealth and power while hiding the blood beneath. At dawn, the skyline shimmered like a blade, sharp and cold, promising to cut anyone who got too close. Julian Voss sat in his car outside Frankie's loft, the USB drive from Victor's safe deposit box, a lead weight in his pocket. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, the flame flickering in the half-light. He hadn't slept in 2 days, and the city's pulse was starting to feel like his own. Erratic, relentless, ready to snap. Frankie's text from an hour ago burned in his mind. "Drive's open. It's a list. Names, accounts, dates. The ledger's real, Voss, and it's a death sentence." But the USB held the Crimson Ledger, or part of it. But before Julian could see it for himself, someone had gotten to Frankie. A break-in, quick and clean, the loft trashed, the drive gone. Frankie was shaken but alive, which was more than Julian could say for most people who crossed paths with Victor's secrets. The thief had left a calling card, a single word scratched into Frankie's desk. "Mirror." Julian exhaled smoke, his eyes scanning the street. The word was a taunt, a clue, or both. Victor had been fond of games, hiding truths in plain sight. Mirror could mean anything, a code, a place, a person. But Julian's gut pointed to one name, Gabriel Ruiz, a ghost from Victor's past. Ruiz had been Victor's enforcer years ago, a shadow who made problems disappear. If anyone was still cleaning up Victor's messes, it was him. Julian crushed the cigarette and started the car, the engine growling like a beast woken too early. Ruiz was a specter, no address, no phone, just whispers in Falcon Ridge's underbelly. But Julian had a lead, an abandoned brothel in the red light district, a place Ruiz was said to haunt. If the ledger was there, or if Ruiz had it, Julian would find out. Even if it meant walking into another trap. The red light district was a scar on Falcon Ridge's face, its streets lined with boarded-up storefronts and flickering signs promising pleasures long gone. The brothel, a crumbling Victorian called the Velvet Room, stood at the end of a dead-end street, its windows dark, its paint peeling like dead skin. Julian parked a block away, his revolver heavy in his coat. The USB drive was tucked in his boot, a precaution after the bank ambush. He wasn't taking chances, not with O'Malley's crew circling like vultures. The air was thick with the smell of rot and cheap perfume, a ghost of the brothel's past. Julian approached the back entrance, a rusted door hanging off its hinges. His lockpick was useless here. The lock was long gone. He slipped inside, the darkness swallowing him like a grave. The interior was a wreck, tattered curtains, broken furniture, the faint echo of laughter that hadn't been heard in years. His flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing graffiti-covered walls and a staircase that looked ready to collapse. A sound, soft, deliberate, came from upstairs. Footsteps, slow and measured, like someone who knew they were being watched. Julian's hand went to his revolver, his pulse steady despite the adrenaline. He climbed the stairs, each step creaking under his weight, and followed the sound to a hallway lined with doors. One was ajar, light spilling from within, faint but unmistakable. He pushed it open, revolver raised. The room was small, a former boudoir with a cracked mirror dominating one wall. Gabriel Ruiz stood in the center, lean and wiry, his face half-shadowed, a hard drive dangling from his fingers like bait. His eyes were cold, reptilian, the kind that didn't blink. A scar ran across his cheek, a jagged line that told stories Julian didn't want to hear. "Voss," Ruiz said, his voice a low rasp, like sandpaper on bone. "You're predictable." "And you're a thief," Julian replied, keeping the revolver steady. "That drive's not yours." Ruiz's lips curled, not quite a smile. Wasn't Victor's either. He thought he could own the world with this. Names, numbers, sins. "But it's poison, Voss. You touch it, you die." Julian stepped closer, his eyes locked on Ruiz. "Then why take it?" "Because someone had to," Ruiz said, tossing the drive onto a dusty table. "Victor's gone, but his mess is still bleeding. You think you're the hunter? You're the prey." Julian's finger tightened on the trigger, but he didn't shoot. Not yet. "Who are you working for? O'Malley? Langston? Or is it someone higher?" Ruiz laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You don't get it, do you? It's not one person. It's the city. Falcon Ridge runs on blood, and Victor was its heart. This drive? It's the proof." Julian's eyes flicked to the hard drive, then back to Ruiz. "What's on it?" "Everything," Ruiz said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Bank accounts, wire transfers, payoffs, cops, politicians, mobsters. Victor recorded it all. The Crimson Ledger isn't just a list, it's a guillotine." Julian's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The ledger wasn't just leverage, it was a weapon, one that could topple Falcon Ridge's power structure. No wonder O'Malley's crew was desperate to bury it. No wonder Eleanor had pointed him at it like a loaded gun. "Hand it over," he said, his voice low, final. Ruiz's hand twitched toward his waist, where a knife gleamed in the dim light. "You're not walking out with it, Voss. Not alive." The room exploded into motion. Ruiz lunged, his knife flashing, but Julian was faster, sidestepping and slamming the butt of his revolver into Ruiz's temple. The enforcer staggered, the knife clattering to the floor, but he recovered quick, tackling Julian into the table. The hard drive skidded across the room, landing near the mirror. Julian's back hit the wall, pain flaring as Ruiz's fist connected with his jaw. He tasted blood, his vision swimming, but he drove his knee into Ruiz's gut, buying a second to breathe. The two men grappled, a brutal dance in the cramped room, furniture splintering under their weight. Julian's revolver slipped from his hand, skidding under the table, but he didn't need it, not yet. He grabbed Ruiz's wrist, twisting until he heard a crack, the enforcer's snarl turning to a scream. Julian shoved him back, diving for the hard drive. His fingers closed around it just as Ruiz recovered, his knife back in hand. The blade sliced through the air, grazing Julian's arm, blood welling hot and fast. He didn't stop, didn't think, just rolled toward the mirror and smashed it with his elbow. The glass shattered, 1,000 jagged reflections scattering across the floor, and Ruiz froze, his eyes wide with something like fear. Julian didn't wait to figure out why. He grabbed the drive and bolted, Ruiz's curses echoing behind him. The hallway was a blur, the stairs a gamble as he took them two at a time, the brothel's decay closing in like a trap. He burst through the back door into the dawn, the city's gray light blinding after the dark. Ruiz didn't follow, but Julian knew he wasn't done, not by a long shot. Back in his car, Julian's arm throbbed, blood soaking his sleeve. He wrapped it with a rag from the glove box, his hands shaking as he plugged the hard drive into a burner laptop he kept for emergencies. The screen flickered, a single file labeled CL-VID-001 staring back at him. He clicked it, his heart pounding. The video was grainy, shot from a hidden camera, but the faces were clear. Victor Lemaire, alive, sitting in a dimly lit room with two men. One was Edward Langston, his silver hair unmistakable, his voice clipped and angry. The other was Captain Hargrove, the police chief who'd shut down Victor's case in record time. They were arguing, their words muffled but sharp, something about payments and exposure. Victor's voice cut through, calm and cold. "You don't touch the ledger, it's my insurance." The video ended abruptly, a timestamp in the corner, 3 days before Victor's death. Julian sat back, his mind reeling. Blackmail. Victor hadn't just kept records. He'd recorded proof, leverage to keep men like Langston and Hargrove in line. The Crimson Ledger wasn't just a list, it was a trap, and Victor had sprung it. Julian's phone buzzed, Frankie's name on the screen. He answered, his voice rough. "What?" "Got into the laptop's CL folder," Frankie said, sounding rattled. "It's a partial list. Bank accounts, mostly offshore, tied to names you don't want to know. But there's a reference to a video. You got anything?" "Yeah," Julian said, glancing at the hard drive. "I got it, and it's worse than we thought." "Voss, listen," Frankie said, his voice urgent. "This isn't just a case. It's a war. You're not just chasing a killer. You're chasing the whole damn city." Julian hung up, his eyes on the skyline. Hargrove was dirty, Langston was complicit, and Ruiz was still out there, a shadow with a knife. Eleanor had sent him into the bank, into the brothel, each step pulling him deeper into Falconridge's rot. Was she using him to expose the truth, or to burn it all down? He thought of Claire, her face flickering in the cracked mirror of his memory. She'd chased the truth once, and it had swallowed her whole. Julian wasn't sure he was any different, but he couldn't stop. Not now, not with the ledger in his hands and blood on his sleeve. He started the car, the engine's roar a challenge to the city's silence. The Crimson Ledger was real, and so was the fight to keep it. In Falconridge, the only way out was through, and Julian was running out of road. Chapter 7. Blood of the Falcon. Falconridge was a city that devoured its own, its streets slick with rain and betrayal. The dawn broke gray and heavy, smearing the skyline into a bruise. Julian Voss sat in a stolen sedan, parked in the shadow of a derelict warehouse, the hard drive from the velvet room burning a hole in his coat pocket. His arm throbbed where Ruiz's knife had grazed it, the rag bandage stiff with dried blood. The video he'd watched, Victor Lemaire, Edward Langston, and Captain Hargrove in a tense standoff, had turned the case from a murder into a conspiracy that could crack the city open. Hargrove, the police chief, wasn't just complicit. He was neck-deep in Victor's schemes, and the Crimson Ledger was the noose around his neck. Julian lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around his thoughts like a ghost. The ledger wasn't just a record, it was a weapon, and Victor had wielded it like a blade. Hargrove's presence in the video explained why the Orchid Lux case had been buried in 48 hours. It explained O'Malley's ambush at the bank. It explained why Julian's phone was buzzing with alerts from police scanners. Suspect Julian Voss, wanted for obstruction of justice and interfering with an active investigation. They weren't just hunting him, they were framing him, painting him as the fall guy to keep the ledger buried. He crushed the cigarette and checked his burner phone. Frankie had gone dark after cracking the laptop's CL folder, his last message a warning. "Get out of town, Voss. This is bigger than you." But Julian didn't run. Not from cops, not from ghosts, not from the truth. Hargrove was the key, and Julian was going to break him. The precinct was a fortress of concrete and glass, its lights blazing through the morning fog. Julian parked a block away, his stolen car blending with the city's detritus. He ditched his own vehicle after the warehouse chase, knowing the cops would have its plates by now. The revolver in his coat felt heavier, a choice he wasn't ready to make, but couldn't avoid. Hargrove was inside, sitting on his throne, pulling strings to keep Falconridge's secrets locked tight. Julian slipped into an alley across from the precinct, his breath misting in the cold. He'd called Sarah Klein before dawn, risking a trace to get a read on Hargrove's movements. She'd been cagey, but confirmed the captain was in his office, barking orders to tighten the net around Julian. "They're saying you broke into the bank, assaulted an officer," she'd said. "Hargrove's pushing hard to pin this on you." Julian hadn't told her about the video, not yet. Trust was a currency he couldn't afford, even with her. He waited, eyes on the precinct's entrance, until a black SUV pulled up, its tinted windows hiding whoever was inside. Hargrove emerged from the building, his bulk unmistakable, his tie loose like he'd been up all night. He climbed into the SUV and it peeled away, heading toward the River District. Julian followed at a distance, his heart pounding, the hard drive a silent accusation in his pocket. The SUV stopped at a private dock, a stretch of waterfront owned by Lemaire Properties. Julian parked behind a stack of shipping crates, the air thick with the smell of diesel and decay. Hargrove stepped out, alone, his face redder than usual, his movements jerky. He met a man in a dark coat, someone Julian didn't recognize. Lean, gray-haired, with the kind of posture that screamed money. They spoke in low tones, Hargrove gesturing wildly, the other man calm, almost amused. Julian crept closer, hiding behind a rusted container, his phone recording through a gap. The audio was faint, but Hargrove's voice carried, sharp with panic. "He's got the drive, Langston. Voss. If he talks, we're done." Langston, because of course it was him, lit a cigar, the flame briefly illuminating his patrician face. "Then make sure he doesn't. You've got the badge, Hargrove. Use it." Julian's blood ran cold. Langston wasn't just involved, he was calling shots. The video had shown them arguing with Victor, but this was proof. They were cleaning up, tying loose ends, and Julian was next on the list. He backed away, his mind racing. Hargrove was dirty, but Langston was the puppet master, and the Crimson Ledger was the prize. Julian needed to get the video to someone who could use it, someone outside Falcon Ridge's web. But first he needed to survive. The city's pulse quickened as Julian drove to a safe house, a rat-infested apartment he'd kept off the books since his cop days. The walls were peeling, the air stale, but it was a place to breathe, to think. He plugged the hard drive into his burner laptop, the video loading again. Victor's voice, calm and cold. "You don't touch the ledger, it's my insurance." Hargrove's response, a snarl. "You're not untouchable, Lemaire." Langston's silence, his eyes calculating, like a shark circling blood. Julian copied the file to a second drive, a backup in case the worst happened. He texted Frankie, "Safe house, now bring everything." Then he called Eleanor, her number going straight to voicemail again. "You set me up," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Bank, brothel, all of it. If you're playing me, I'll burn you down with the rest of them." He hung up, his hands shaking with rage and exhaustion. Eleanor had known about the ledger, the bank, the pin. She'd pointed him at Langston, at Ruiz, but every step had led to a trap. Was she a victim, a mastermind, or just another ghost in Falcon Ridge's machine? Frankie arrived an hour later, his backpack stuffed with gear, his face pale. "You're a wanted man, Voss," he said, dropping into a chair. "Police radios lit up with your name. Obstruction, assault, even a bullshit theft charge. Hargrove's pulling every string." "Then let's cut them," Julian said, sliding the hard drive across the table. "What else you got on the ledger?" Frankie opened his laptop, his fingers flying. The CL folder from Victor's laptop. It's a fragment. Offshore accounts, wire transfers, names, politicians, cops, mobsters. Your pal Hargrove's in there, tied to a shell company that funneled money to Lemaire Properties. But the drive you got? It's the real deal. Full ledger, or close to it. Names, dates, amounts, millions, Voss. Enough to bury half the city. Julian's eyes narrowed. Hargrove's in the video, with Langston. They were blackmailing Victor, or he was blackmailing them. Either way, they wanted him dead. Frankie whistled low. "You're not just poking a hornet's nest, you're burning it down. What's the play?" "Get the video to someone clean," Julian said. "Klein, maybe. She's the only cop I half trust. But first, I need to know who else is on that ledger." Frankie nodded, his screen glowing with data. "Give me an hour, but Voss, you're on borrowed time. Hargrove's got the whole force after you." "Let them come," Julian said, his voice cold. "I'm not running." The safe house wasn't safe for long. Julian heard the sirens before he saw the lights, red and blue flashing through the cracked blinds. He grabbed the hard drive, shoving it into his boot, and handed Frankie the backup. "Get out through the fire escape. Keep that drive safe." Frankie hesitated, his eyes wide. "What about you?" "I'll handle it," Julian said, his revolver already in hand. "Go!" Frankie scrambled out the back as the front door shuddered under a battering ram. Julian slipped into the hallway, his heart pounding, and took the stairs two at a time. The building was a maze of crumbling plaster and dead ends, but Julian knew it like his own scars. He hit the alley just as the cops breached the apartment, their shouts echoing behind him. The city was a trap now, every street a potential ambush. Julian stuck to the shadows, his coat blending with the night, the hard drive a weight he couldn't shake. Hargrove's frame job was tight. Obstruction of justice was a catch-all, vague enough to justify anything from arrest to a bullet. Julian needed leverage, and he needed it fast. He ducked into a payphone booth, one of the last in Falcon Ridge, and dialed Klein again. She answered on the first ring, her voice sharp. "Voss, you're radioactive. What the hell did you do?" "Not me," Julian said, his breath misting in the cold. "Hargrove's dirty. I've got a video. Him, Langston, Victor. They were in bed together, and Victor's death wasn't an accident." Klein went silent, the kind of silence that carried weight. "You've got proof?" "On a drive," Julian said. "But I need you to get it out. Media, feds, someone who's not bought." "Voss, you're a fugitive," she said, her voice low. "Hargrove's got everyone looking for you. If I take this, I'm painting a target on my back." "Then don't take it," Julian said. "Just tell me where to send it." She gave him a name, Lydia Carter, a reporter at the Falcon Ridge Herald who dodged the city's bribes so far. "But Voss," Klein added, "if Hargrove's in this, he's not alone. Watch your back." Julian hung up, the city's pulse pounding in his ears. He stepped out of the booth, his eyes scanning the street. A patrol car cruised past, slow, its spotlight sweeping the shadows. Julian ducked behind a dumpster, his heart racing, the hard drive a ticking bomb in his boot. Hargrove wasn't just a crooked cop, he was a linchpin, and the ledger was the key to breaking him. Julian found a drop spot, a mailbox in a quiet corner of the old district, and sent the backup drive to Carter with a note. "Watch it. Leak it. Don't trust anyone." He kept the original, knowing it was his only leverage. The city was closing in, its jaws snapping at his heels. But Julian wasn't done. Hargrove was exposed, but Langston was still out there. And so was Ruiz. And Eleanor, her silence was louder than the sirens. He thought of Claire, her face a flicker in the dark, her absence a wound that never healed. She'd chased the truth once, and it had taken her. Julian wasn't sure he was any different, but he couldn't stop. Not with the ledger in his hands and Hargrove's lies unraveling. The city of Falcon Ridge was a beast, and Julian was its hunter, even if it meant becoming its prey. Chapter 8. The second death. Falcon Ridge was a city that fed on despair, its streets slick with rain and the weight of unspoken truths. The dawn was a lie, a gray smear that promised light but delivered only shadows. Julian Voss sat in a stolen pickup truck, parked in an alley behind a shuttered deli, the hard drive with Victor Lemaire's blackmail video tucked inside his boot. His arm ached where Ruiz's knife had sliced it, the makeshift bandage crusted with blood. The city's pulse beat in his ears, a relentless drum that matched the ache in his skull. He was a wanted man now, his face plastered across the police bulletins, branded a fugitive for crimes he didn't commit. Obstruction, assault, theft. Hargrove's frame job was tight and Julian was running out of places to hide. The video had exposed Captain Hargrove and Edward Langston, their voices on the grainy footage, admitting complicity in Victor's schemes. The Crimson Ledger, or what Julian had of it, was a death sentence for half of Falcon Ridge's elite. Cops, politicians, mobsters, all named in Victor's meticulous records. Julian had sent a copy to Lydia Carter, a reporter at the Falcon Ridge Herald, but the silence since then was deafening. Either she was scared or she was dead. In Falcon Ridge, both were equally likely. Julian lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like a ghost in the cab. Frankie was in hiding, the backup drive safe for now, but the original was with Julian, a ticking bomb he couldn't let go. Eleanor Lemaire's voicemail haunted him, her silence after the bank ambush, her absence after the brothel fight. She'd pointed him at the ledger, at Langston, at Ruiz, But every step had been a trap. Was she playing him, or was she just another pawn in the city's game? His burner phone buzzed, a text from Sarah Klein. Lydia Carter's dead. Found in her apartment, ruled suicide. Stay low. Julian's stomach twisted, the cigarette falling from his fingers. Carter was his last hope, the one clean shot at exposing Hargrove and Langston. A suicide ruling in Falcon Ridge meant one thing: murder dressed up to look like despair. The city was closing ranks and Julian was running out of moves. The apartment building was a crumbling tenement in the old district, its windows boarded, its hallways reeking of mildew and regret. Julian slipped in through a fire escape, his revolver heavy in his coat. Carter's place was on the 5th floor, the door marked with police tape that hung like a warning. He picked the lock, the click too loud in the silence, and stepped inside. The apartment was a crime scene, or what passed for one in Falcon Ridge. Carter's body was gone, but the evidence lingered. A chair tipped over, a rope still knotted to a ceiling beam, the air thick with the scent of bleach. The cops had been thorough, sanitizing anything that might point to foul play. But Julian knew better. He'd seen staged suicides before, back when he wore a badge and believed in justice. He moved through the room, his flashlight cutting through the dark. Carter's desk was a mess of papers, notes, clippings, a laptop with its drive wiped clean. Whoever had done this knew their craft, but they'd missed something. Tucked under a stack of files was a single page, torn from a notebook with a hurried scrawl. Ledger reel. Hargrove, Langston, Vega. Check waterfront deal. Julian pocketed it, his pulse quickening. Carter had been close, too close, and it had cost her. A noise, soft, deliberate, came from the hallway. Julian killed the flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, his revolver drawn. Footsteps, slow and heavy, stopped outside the door. A shadow moved under the gap, then the handle turned. Julian held his breath, his finger on the trigger, as the door creaked open. It was O'Malley, the cop from the bank, his silhouette unmistakable in the dim light. He wasn't alone. Another figure, smaller, stayed in the shadows. O'Malley swept his flashlight across the room, missing Julian by inches. "He's been here," O'Malley muttered, his voice tight. "Check the desk." The second figure stepped forward, a woman, her face obscured by a hood. She moved to the desk, her hands quick, searching. Julian's mind raced. Not a cop, not one of Hargrove's goons. Someone else, someone tied to the ledger. He waited, his heart pounding, until they turned to leave, their voices fading down the hall. Julian slipped out the fire escape, the note burning in his pocket. Carter's death wasn't just a cover-up, it was a message. The ledger was a guillotine, and anyone who got too close was next. Julian's resolve wavered, a crack in the armor he'd built from whiskey and rage. He was tired, bone deep, the kind of tired that made quitting look like salvation. He could disappear, leave Falcon Ridge and its ghost behind. But then he thought of Claire, her face fading in his memory, her absence a wound that never healed. She'd died chasing the truth, and Julian couldn't let her go without finishing what she'd started. He drove to the safe house, the pickup's engine rattling like his thoughts. The apartment was empty, Frankie long gone, the air heavy with the smell of stale coffee and fear. Julian sank into a chair, the hard drive in his hand, Carter's note on the table. Waterfront deal. It was a thread, thin but real, tying Hargrove, Langston, and Vega to Victor's empire. The ledger named them all, and Carter had died for it. A knock at the door jolted him upright, his revolver snapping to attention. No one knew this place, not even Klein. He crept to the door, peering through the peephole. Nothing but shadows. Then a letter slid under the door, its envelope plain, unmarked. Julian's gut twisted, but he picked it up, tearing it open with hands that shook from exhaustion and adrenaline. The letter was from Eleanor, her handwriting sharp as a blade. "Voss, you're close, closer than I thought you'd get. Carter's death wasn't your fault, but it's a warning. The ledger is bigger than Victor, bigger than Falcon Ridge. It's the city's heart, and they'll kill to keep it beating. Don't stop, not now. You're the only one who can finish this." I'm sorry for the bank, for Ruiz. I didn't know they'd come for you. Find the waterfront deal. It's the key. Burn them all down. Eleanor Julian read it twice, his jaw tight. Her words were fuel, reigniting the fire he'd thought was dead. She was either the best liar he'd ever met or the only one telling the truth. Either way, she'd given him a direction, and he wasn't done yet. He tucked the letter into his coat, next to the hard drive, and checked his revolver. 6 bullets, one for each mistake he couldn't afford to make. The waterfront was a graveyard of cranes and rusted ships, its docks a maze of shadows and secrets. Julian parked near a derelict warehouse, the pickup blending with the decay. The waterfront deal had been Victor's crown jewel, a multi-billion-dollar project to turn the docks into luxury condos and casinos. Daniel Hargrove, the CFO, had fought Victor over it, calling it reckless. Carter's note suggested it was more a front for the Ledger's dirty money, a pipeline for the mafia and the city's elite. Julian moved through the docks, his flashlight off, his eyes adjusting to the dark. The warehouse was a hulking ruin, its doors chained but loose. He slipped inside, the air thick with the smell of salt and oil. Crates were stacked high, their labels faded, but one caught his eye. Lemaire Properties, Lot 712. The number again, a ghost that wouldn't stay buried. He pried open the crate, revealing a stack of files and a laptop, its screen cracked but intact. He powered it on, the glow harsh in the dark. A single file waited, labeled Waterfront Ledger. Julian's heart pounded as he opened it, revealing spreadsheets, accounts, transfers, names. Hargrove, Langston, Vega, and others he didn't recognize, all tied to offshore banks and shell companies. The amounts were staggering, millions funneled through the waterfront deal, clean money turned dirty and back again. A noise, metal on metal, cut through the silence. Julian killed the laptop, shoving it into his coat as footsteps approached. He ducked behind a crate, his revolver ready as 3 figures entered the warehouse. O'Malley was at the front, his flashlight sweeping the dark. The other 2 were cops, their vests marked with tactical gear, their faces hard. They weren't here to arrest him. They were here to kill. "He's here," O'Malley said, his voice low, urgent. "Find him. No witnesses." Julian's breath was shallow, his mind racing. The ledger was in his hands, the truth within reach, but he was cornered, outnumbered. He thought of Eleanor's letter, her words a spark in the dark. Burn them all down. He wasn't done yet, not while he still had a fight left. He moved silently, slipping between crates, his eyes on O'Malley. The cop was close, too close, his flashlight grazing the edge of Julian's hiding spot. Julian lunged, tackling O'Malley to the ground, the flashlight clattering away. The other cops shouted, drawing their weapons, but Julian was already moving, using O'Malley as a shield. A shot rang out, the bullet grazing his shoulder, pain flaring hot and sharp. Julian fired back, his revolver barking twice, one cop dropping with a scream. The other hesitated, and Julian used the moment to slam O'Malley's head into a crate, the cop slumping unconscious. The third cop bolted, his footsteps fading into the night. Julian didn't chase. He didn't have the strength. He grabbed the laptop, his shoulder burning, and staggered out of the warehouse, the ledger's weight heavier than ever. Back at the safe house, Julian patched his shoulder with a first aid kit, the pain a dull roar. The laptop sat on the table, its secrets exposed. The waterfront deal was the heart of Victor's empire, a laundering machine that tied Hargrove, Langston, and Vega to the mafia and beyond. Eleanor's letter had been right. The ledger was the city's heart, and Julian was holding it. He called Frankie, his voice hoarse. "Got another laptop, waterfront deal, full ledger. Get it to Carter's editor at the Herald. No one else." "Voss, you're bleeding out," Frankie said, his voice tight. "Get to a hospital." "Not yet," Julian said, hanging up. He lit another cigarette, the smoke steadying him. Carter's death, the frame job, the chase, they were all pieces of the same puzzle. Hargrove was dirty, Langston was pulling strings, and Eleanor was either his ally or his executioner. But the ledger was real, and so was the fight. Julian thought of Claire, her face a flicker in the dark, her absence a fire that kept him moving. He wasn't done, not yet. Falcon Ridge was a beast, and Julian was its hunter, even if it meant becoming its prey. Chapter 9. The Man Behind It All. Falcon Ridge was a city of wolves, each one circling the other, teeth bared in the dark. The rain had returned, a relentless curtain that blurred the skyline into a smear of neon and steel. Julian Voss crouched in the shadows of a rooftop across from Moretti Enterprises headquarters, a glass tower that stabbed at the sky like a middle finger. His shoulder burned where the bullet had grazed him in the warehouse, the makeshift bandage stiff with blood. The hard drive and laptop, both pieces of the Crimson Ledger, were hidden in a safe house with Frankie, but their weight clung to him like a curse. The city was closing in, its jaws snapping, and Julian was running out of time. The Falcon Ridge Herald hadn't run the story. Lydia Carter's editor had gone silent, either bought or buried, and Julian's name was still plastered across police bulletins, wanted for obstruction, assault, and now suspicion in Carter's suicide. Captain Hargrove's frame job was ironclad, and Edward Langston's influence loomed behind it, a shadow pulling strings. But a new name had surfaced from the waterfront ledger. Vincent Moretti, chairman of Moretti Enterprises, Victor's old friend turned rival. Carter's note had mentioned him alongside Hargrove and Vega, and Frankie's decryption had confirmed it. Moretti's accounts were tied to the same shell companies as Victor's. If anyone knew who'd killed Victor, or why, it was him. Julian lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his face. Gaunt, unshaven, eyes like chipped flint. The ledger was a guillotine, its blade poised over Falcon Ridge's elite, and Moretti was one of its architects. Julian had one play left: confront him, break him, and get the truth before the city crushed him. Moretti Enterprises headquarters was a fortress of wealth, its lobby a cathedral of marble and gold. Julian didn't bother with the front door. Too many cameras, too many guards. Instead, he slipped through a service entrance in the alley, the lock giving way under his pick like an old promise. His revolver was a cold weight in his coat, the hard drive's absence a reminder of how thin his margin for error had become. Frankie had promised to leak the ledger to a Fed contact if Julian didn't make it out. But in Falcon Ridge, promises were as fragile as glass. The executive floor was a maze of glass offices and hushed voices, even at this hour. Moretti's suite was at the end, a corner office with a view of the city's heart. Julian moved silently, his boots muffled on the carpet, the weight of the case pressing heavier with every step. The door was ajar, light spilling out, and he heard Moretti's voice, smooth, confident, the kind of voice that closed deals and buried bodies. Julian pushed the door open, revolver low but ready. Vincent Moretti stood behind a mahogany desk, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a suit that cost more than Julian's car. He was on the phone, his back to the door, laughing softly. No, it's handled. The ledger's a ghost now. Voss won't last the night." Julian cleared his throat, and Moretti spun, his eyes narrowing. He ended the call without a word, his smile thin as a razor. "Voss," he said, his voice calm but edged. "You're bolder than I thought." "Or dumber," Julian replied, stepping into the room, his revolver still at his side. "You and Victor were friends once. Now he's dead, and your name's all over his ledger. Care to explain?" Moretti didn't flinch, just leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You've got the wrong man, Voss. I didn't kill Victor. We had our differences, sure. But murder? That's not my style." "Then what is?" Julian asked, his voice low, cutting. "Because the ledger says you were moving money with him. Waterfront deal, offshore accounts, the works. You, Hargrove, Langston, Vega, all in bed with the mafia." Moretti's smile widened, but his eyes were cold, predatory. "You're a detective, so detect. Victor and I were partners, yes. Back when he was hungry, not greedy. We built this city's skyline together. Condos, casinos, dreams. But he changed. Started keeping records, playing both sides. The Crimson Ledger was his mistake, not mine." Julian stepped closer, his revolver twitching. "You're saying you had nothing to do with his death?" "I'm saying I didn't need to," Moretti said. his voice smooth as silk. Victor made enemies faster than he made money. The mafia, the cops, even Langston, they all wanted him gone. I just made sure the truth stayed buried. Julian's blood ran hot, his finger tightening on the trigger. You're admitting it. You set him up. Moretti laughed, a sound like breaking ice. Set him up? No, Voss, I cleaned up. Victor was a loose end, a bomb waiting to go off. Someone had to tie him off. I made sure it happened quietly. Hargrove's cops, Vega's muscle, Langston's money, but I didn't tighten the belt around his neck. That was someone else's hand. Then whose? Julian snapped, his patience fraying. You're the man behind it all, Moretti. You've got the motive, the means, the connections. Moretti stood, his height imposing, his eyes locked on Julian's. You want a name? I don't have one, but I'll tell you this. The ledger's real and it's poison. Every name in it, every dollar is a death sentence. You keep digging, you'll end up like Carter, or your wife. Julian's vision went red, the revolver snapping up to Moretti's chest. Don't say her name. Moretti didn't blink. Claire, wasn't it? She got too close to the truth, just like you. Walk away, boss. You can't save her, and you can't save yourself. The room spun, Claire's face flickering in Julian's mind. Her smile, her absence, the note she left behind. He wanted to pull the trigger, to end Moretti's smug certainty, but he didn't. Not yet. Where's the ledger? He asked, his voice a growl. Moretti shrugged, unfazed. If I knew, you'd already be dead. Victor hit it well, too well. The drive you've got? It's a piece, not the whole. The rest is out there, and everyone's looking. Cops, mob, me. You're not the hunter, Voss. You're the bait. Julian lowered the revolver, his mind racing. Moretti was playing him, deflecting. But there was truth in his words. The ledger was fragmented, scattered, and Julian was holding only a shard. Hargrove, Langston, Vega, they were all chasing the same prize, and Julian was caught in the crossfire. Last chance, Julian said. Tell me who killed Victor. Moretti's smile returned, sharp and cold. You're asking the wrong question. It's not who killed him, it's who's next. Keep that drive, and it's you. Julian backed toward the door, his eyes never leaving Moretti. You're wrong about one thing. I'm not bait, I'm the trap. He slipped out, the glass tower swallowing his shadow. The city's pulse thrummed around him, a reminder that he was still alive, still fighting. But Moretti's words clung like damp rot. You can't save her, and you can't save yourself. Julian drove to the safe house, his shoulders screaming, his mind a tangle of rage and doubt. The pickup's engine rattled, a mirror to his fraying nerves. Moretti hadn't confessed to murder, but he'd admitted enough. Manipulation, collusion, a city built on blood. The ledger was the key, and Julian was holding a piece of it, but the rest was out there, a puzzle with too many missing edges. Frankie was waiting at the safe house, his laptop glowing in the dark, his face pale with exhaustion. You look like death, he said, eyeing Julian's bloodied shoulder. Feel like it, Julian replied, tossing the burner laptop onto the table. What's the latest? Frankie tapped the screen, pulling up the waterfront ledger. More names, more accounts, politicians, judges, even a Fed or two. This thing's a nuke, Voss. Moretti's in here. Big money, tied to the same offshore banks as Victor. He wasn't lying about being partners. But he's lying about the murder, Julian said, lighting a cigarette. He's in too deep to be clean. Him, Hargrove, Langston, they're all covering tracks. Carter died because she got close. I'm next unless we move fast. Frankie nodded, his fingers flying. I sent the video to the feds, like you said. No response yet, but I've got a back door into their system. If they bury it, I'll know. Good, Julian said, exhaling smoke. Keep the drive safe. If I don't make it, leak it, all of it. Frankie's eyes widened. You're not giving up, are you? Julian thought of Claire, her absence of fire in his chest. He thought of Eleanor, her letter urging him to burn it all down. He thought of Carter, her staged suicide, a warning he couldn't ignore. Not yet, he said, his voice steady. But I need to know who's pulling Moretti's strings. He's not the top, he's just the face. Frankie hesitated, then pulled up a file. There's one name that keeps popping up, not in the ledger, but in Victor's emails. The Falcon. No first name, no details, just references to meetings, payments, could be a code name. Julian's pulse quickened. The Falcon. It fit Falconridge, a city that preyed on its own. Find him, he said. Cross-reference everything. Emails, accounts, anything. If Moretti's not the top, the Falcon is. Julian left the safe house, the city's rain a cold slap against his face. He needed to confront Eleanor again, to know if she was ally or enemy. Her letter had lit a spark, but her silence since the brothel was a shadow he couldn't shake. He dialed her number, the call going to voicemail again. Eleanor, he said, his voice rough, if you're playing me, it ends now. Meet me at the Blackthorn midnight. Don't make me come find you. He hung up, his eyes on the skyline. Moretti's confession wasn't enough, not yet. The ledger was a weapon, but without the full picture, it was a gun with no bullets. Hargrove was exposed, Langston was complicit, and Moretti was the architect. But someone else was out there. The Falcon, a name that carried the weight of the city itself. Julian thought of Claire, her face fading in the rain, her absence a wound he couldn't close. He was tired, bone deep, the kind of tired that made death look like rest. But the ledger was real, and so was the truth. In Falconridge, the only way out was through, and Julian was too stubborn to die. Chapter 10. Only silence remains. Falconridge was a city that thrived on indifference, its heart a cold machine that ground truth into dust. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming, a mirror for the city's lies. Julian Voss sat in a booth at the Blackthorn Cafe, the same dive where Eleanor Lemaire had first hired him. Her cryptic note about the Crimson Ledger, now a weight he couldn't shake. The hard drive, the laptop, the fragments of Victor Lemaire's empire. They were all with Frankie, who'd spent the last 24 hours uploading everything to every media outlet that would listen. The Falconridge Herald, the feds, even a rogue blogger with a reputation for biting the hand that fed. Julian had burned every bridge, exposed every name, Hargrove, Langston, Moretti, Vega, and waited for the city to burn with them. It didn't. The city didn't care. The Herald ran a tepid story on page 6, buried under headlines about a new casino opening. The feds hadn't responded, their silence louder than sirens. The blogger's site went dark within hours, a 404 error where the ledger's files should have been. Falconridge had swallowed the truth whole, its jaws snapping shut, and Julian was left with nothing but the taste of ash and whiskey. His shoulder throbbed, the bullet grazed from the warehouse a dull ache under a fresh bandage. His face was a ghost in the diner's window, gaunt and hollow, the lines around his eyes carved deeper by days without sleep. The revolver in his coat was a cold comfort, its 6 bullets a promise he hadn't yet kept. He was still a wanted man, Hargrove's frame job holding tight. Obstruction, assault, suspicion in Lydia Carter's staged suicide. The city's pulse beat against him, a reminder that he was prey in a jungle of predators. Eleanor hadn't shown at the Blackthorn last night, her voicemail a dead end, her absence a question mark. Was she hiding, or had she been another casualty, like Carter? Julian didn't know, and the not knowing was a blade in his gut. The Crimson Ledger was real. Names, accounts, millions laundered through Victor's waterfront deal, tying the mafia to cops to politicians. But it hadn't been enough. The city was too big, too rotten, its roots too deep to uproot. Julian's burner phone buzzed, Frankie's name lighting up the screen. He answered, his voice rough from smoke and exhaustion. Tell me it worked. It didn't, Frankie said, his voice flat, defeated. The Herald spiked the story, said it was unsubstantiated. Feds aren't talking. The files are out there. Dark web, some offshore servers, but no one's biting. It's like the city's got a gag order. Julian's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles white. Moretti? Hargrove? Langston? Untouched, Frankie said. Hargrove's still police chief. Langston's throwing a gala tomorrow, and Moretti's on a yacht somewhere, probably laughing. Vega's gone quiet, but that's no surprise. The ledger named them all, But it's like they're bulletproof. Julian hung up, his eyes on the diner's empty tables. He'd done what Eleanor asked, burned them all down, or tried to. The video of Hargrove and Langston, the waterfront ledger, the accounts tying Moretti to Victor's empire. It should have been enough. But Falconridge didn't run on truth. It ran on power, and power didn't bow to evidence. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling around his thoughts. Claire's face flickered in his mind, her smile a memory he couldn't hold. She'd died chasing the truth, and Julian had followed her path, thinking he could finish what she'd started. Now he wasn't sure. The ledger was out there, scattered across servers and inboxes, but it was a ghost, a whisper no one wanted to hear. He thought of Carter, her staged suicide, her note about the waterfront deal. He thought of Ruiz, the enforcer who'd vanished into the city's shadows. He thought of Eleanor, her letter urging him to keep fighting, even as she disappeared. A waitress slid a coffee in front of him, her eyes avoiding his. "On the house," she muttered, retreating to the counter. Julian didn't touch it. He didn't deserve kindness, not after failing Claire, failing Carter, failing himself. The ledger was his last shot, and it had misfired. He left the diner, the city's silence pressing against him. The streets were empty, the skyline a jagged scar against the dawn. Julian drove to the waterfront, the heart of Victor's empire, where cranes loomed like skeletal gods. The warehouse where he'd fought O'Malley was sealed now, police tape fluttering in the wind. He parked and stepped out, the hard drive still in his boot, a final piece of the puzzle he couldn't let go. He walked to the edge of the dock, the water black and still, reflecting the city's lights like a lie. He thought about dropping the drive into the depths, letting Falconridge swallow it like it had swallowed everything else. But he didn't. Instead, he pulled out his phone and sent one last message to Frankie. "Keep pushing, leak it again, don't stop." The truth wasn't enough, not in this city. Justice was a fairy tale, a story told to children who didn't know better. But the truth was something else, stubborn, unyielding, a blade that cut even when no one felt it. Julian had spent his life chasing it, losing Claire, losing himself, and he wasn't done. Not yet. He thought of Moretti's words. "You're not the hunter, you're the bait." Maybe he was right. Maybe Julian was just a pawn, a man too stubborn to quit. But the ledger was out there, in fragments, in copies, in the shadows of servers no one could erase. It was in the fear in Hargrove's eyes, the silence in Langston's denials, the smirk on Moretti's face. It was in the city itself, a truth that wouldn't die, even if no one cared. Julian turned back to the city, his shadow long and jagged on the dock. The rain started again, soft at first, then heavier, washing away the blood and the ash, but not the weight. He lit another cigarette, the flame a small defiance against the dark, and spoke to no one, his voice a low rasp that carried over the water. "Justice is a joke," he said, the words bitter, final. "A fairy tale for suckers who think the world plays fair. It doesn't, never did. But the truth? That's different. It's not a hero, not a savior. It's a shadow that follows you, a whisper you can't unhear. It's in the copies I sent, the drives I hid, the files no one can bury forever. It's in the fear in their eyes. Hargrove, Langston, Moretti, all of them. They know it's out there, waiting, watching. They know they'll never escape it, not really. The truth doesn't need applause. It doesn't need headlines. It just needs to exist. And it does, in the dark, in the silence, in the eyes of the ones who know they're damned." He exhaled, the smoke vanishing into the rain, and walked back to the pickup. The city loomed around him, its towers gleaming, its secrets buried but not dead. Julian Voss was a ghost now, a fugitive in a city that didn't forgive. But he wasn't alone. The Crimson Ledger was out there, a spark in the dark, and one day it would ignite. For now, he drove into the night, the truth his only companion, and Falconridge watched, silent and unyielding.